So we're going to look at birds today. All right, so birds. There's a lot we don't know about bird ancestors, the dinosaurs. There's been a recent discovery of a dinosaur from Argentina. It has spikes along its back, kind of a weird looking guy. But birds are part of that reptilian lineage that went on a different pathway. The evolution of the birds. They're thought to have descended from the Saurischian lineage of the dinosaurs, the theropod dinosaurs. Feathers are the primary defining characteristic. If it has feathers, we consider it a bird. Recently discovered, this is a model reconstruction of Fukiopteryx prima. This is, again, another early bird, transitional species. There's been many of these that have come about in recent years as we have been looking for a connection between birds and dinosaurs. And the thing that connects them, birds and dinosaurs, is the structure, the feather. There are modified scales that have various functions. There are contour feathers. These cover the body. Smooth, firm feathers. They're used in flight. There are also downy feathers. If you've ever had a down pillow or a down comforter, these are less rigid, insulating feathers to keep you warm. You get a jacket that's full of these and it'll keep you warm. Interesting note about down feathers that I like to mention is that down feathers can be recovered in several ways. So if you have a pillow, if you have a comforter, if you have a jacket, and you want to know where those feathers came from, they don't politely ask the birds for them. What they can do first is they can wait for birds to drop them. The birds will shed them on occasionally and they can collect them and make something out of them. The next thing that they can do is they can comb the birds. This is a little bit more painful process. They basically take a comb, like a hair comb, and they run it along the length of the back of the bird, and it pulls the feathers out of the bird. Now, this is like combing your hair and pulling out the hair, trying purposefully to pull out some of your hair. So again, this is painful and unpleasant. And then the third and most horrible way is they actually just pull all the feathers, strip the feathers off the body of the bird. In many cases, the combing and the plucking of feathers happens to birds that are still alive. I'm not a huge fan of the feather collection industry. If you look at the costs associated with the various ways of collecting, combing and plucking are the, plucking is going to give you the most feathers, and it's probably the cheapest. Plucking or combing is in the middle of the road, so those things are probably more likely used. I try not to support the down feather industry because of that. Filoplume feathers. These are feathers that have some sensory function. Think like in mammals, we have hair, and hair serves to protect and insulate us. Well, we also have some mammals that have whiskers that are used for sensing. So if you have a cat or if you have a dog, they have whiskers on their face, and they use those to kind of feel around in their environment. Filoplume feathers serve a similar function in birds. Molting. Periodically, birds will shed and replace the feathers. Sounds kind of like shedding of skin in reptiles. It's the same kind of thing of molting in reptiles. However, birds will never lose all of their feathers at once. There are some reptiles that will molt all of their skin at once. The skeleton of birds. There are several key characteristics we're going to look at for the skeletons of birds because they are important to them being able to fly. The synchrasum is a fusion of the posterior thoracic vertebrae. You can see the arrow kind of pointing to that region of the backbone. It's used to maintain proper flight posture and support hind limbs. So attach their legs, attach flight muscles to help them fly. The very tail end, no pun intended, fusion of posterior caudal vertebrae is the pygostyle. It supports the tail feathers for steering flight. So in that image, if you can imagine, the tail feathers of that bird kind of would stick up in this orientation, and they could lower those feathers, they could flex them, spread them out, and they could do all kinds of repositioning with their feathers based on that bone, which allows them to fly. or have some control in flight. The furcula, fused clavicles. The wishbone, as it's often known, is used to attach the large flight muscles. So this is the furcula. Clavicles are your collarbones that are fused up here at the top. Then we've got this arrow pointing to what is called the sternal keel. The keel of a boat is the extended part down at the bottom of the boat that helps keep it upright. The sternal keel is kind of an extension that goes underneath the bird. It doesn't keep them upright in water, but what it does is it allows flight muscles to attach to them. Adaptations for flight. What does it take to fly? It takes feathers, they need decreased weight, they need increased power, and that pretty much is it. Those are the things that allow birds to fly. Their wings function as an airfoil, kind of like the wing of an airplane. They're thicker in the front, and they create lift due to the different airflow over the surface of the wing. So what that means is if the wing is thick at the front, and air flows over it, and then the wing gets thinner towards the back. As the air flows over it, there's less air pressure. Less air pressure means that the bird is lifted up. And we use the same design in wings of planes. This is something that the Wright brothers analyzed when they were trying to make planes, and engineers have tried for many years to mimic the things that are successful flyers, the natural flyers, to come up with mechanical flight. Where did flight come from? Okay, so there's 4 times in the history of life on the planet that we know organisms have flown. First is insects. So those guys were probably the first animals out of the water, coming out of those algal mats, crawling out of that early ocean, and then the first to fly probably. We also have pterosaurs, the flying reptiles. They were around at the time of the dinosaurs. They are not dinosaurs. Remember, that was a separate lineage. When we talked about reptiles, we covered that. But pterosaurs were definitely flyers. Birds, which are descendants of the dinosaurs. There's a picture of Archaeopteryx to kind of remind you of what we're talking about there. And then mammals. Bats are also flyers in the mammal lineage. All 4 of these types of flight that we know of. Maybe there's more that we haven't recovered fossils of some flying animal that was around on the earth at some point. We don't know about it. All 4 of these flight mechanisms are different. Insects have wings that kind of grow out of their body under their carapace. Birds have basically arm bones that extend to fingers at the end, and they have feathers along the length of their front limbs. Bats basically have finger bones that extend out through the wing itself. Pterosaurs are similar to what we see in birds, but not exactly, but a different kind of bone structure that goes into the wing of pterosaurs. There's 2 theories of how this happened. How did we get birds flying? The first theory is tree down. So basically what that theory states is that these things were probably tree-dwelling predators. They're hunting insects or other small animals that lived in the trees, and when they were in the tree, they could jump from branch to branch, and as they jump from branch to branch, if they have feathers for insulation, maybe having feathers on your arms made it a little easier if you glide from branch to branch, sort of like we see happening in flying squirrels today. They don't actually fly, but they glide from branch to branch. There are some snakes that do this, that will jump from branch to branch. That's tree down. And after a great deal of time, those better evolved at being able to control that descent became flyers. Ground up theory, just the opposite. Maybe these theropod dinosaurs were ground hunters. Some of the ancestors of the theropod lineage, Compsognathus, Velociraptor, Utah raptor, if you've ever seen those dinosaurs, were kind of swift ground hunters. So maybe Archaeopteryx was a swift ground hunter, or its recent relatives were swift ground hunters, and they had feather covering to keep insulation, to keep them warm, and they found that they could jump up and dive down on their prey when they were about to deliver a killing blow. And if they have feathers, maybe their glides would allow them to jump and glide for longer and longer distances, which allowed them to travel faster from the ground to flying up. So two theories about how flight has come about. We don't have the answer yet. That is something that we're still trying to figure out. Mechanics of bird's flight. All right, so this is showing you that lift of the wing. You've got air moving over the top of the wing, air moving underneath the wing. This is the front end of the wing approaching heading towards the front of the animal. And you can see that you get turbulence if the wing is not in the right position, but if they can have a little, what's called an alula, a little feather at the top, a guide feather, it actually helps make the wind flow smoothly over the wing, and it creates kind of a vacuum where there is less air pressure here, and that vacuum actually pulls the bird up. So here are the alula, the little guide feathers on the ends of the wing. To analyze the wing of the bird, this is the humerus, which is the upper bone in your arm. Radius and ulna are the two lower bones in your forearm. And then this extended part at the end is the wrist, and you can see that they have a second, third, and fourth digit. The bones are either fused in or disappear for their first and fifth digit. So basically it's the middle three digits that they're using at the extended part of their wing. Most birds are monogamous, meaning that they have a single male-female pairing when they reproduce. This doesn't mean that they are monogamous throughout their entire life cycle, but in general they will pair up with a single male-female pairing. There are some that are known to only have one mate throughout their life. There are some species that are polyandrous. Poly means many. Androus means that the male has many mates. So males in some species mate with more than one female. There are also polygynous birds, where the females will mate with more than one male. Many, gyno means female, so the female has many partners. So look at this, these two little pictures of young birds. There's a significant difference between the one on the right and the one on the left. Birds that are born mostly featherless and completely dependent on their parents are called altricial. Altricial means that you are dependent. If you are precocial, that means you are born alert and lively. This is a chick, and that chick is up running around. It has feathers. Can walk, run, swim, feed itself. This one has to have parents bring food to it. It's helpless, and it sits in the nest calling for help. Precocial is the same word, or has the same root as the word precocious, which we use to describe a child that has a lot of activity, that's getting into trouble, constantly doing stuff. Oh, what a precocious child. Same word. It means that the young is alert, lively, active, getting into things. Barn owl, cool story about the barn owl. Barn owls have a ruff of feathers around their head that actually help project sound into their ears to make them really good at hearing. They're kind of white in color. There's a theory that they are probably responsible for our story of ghosts, modern conception of ghosts. If you've ever seen ghosts that look like a person hiding under a sheet with two black eyes coming out of the darkness at you, you can kind of envision this thing living in your barn. You go into your barn late at night and it jumps out at you. You see two black eyes and a big white blob coming at you. That might be pretty frightening. The sound that barn owls make is actually very similar. I've heard it described as the sound of rattling chains, and if you are familiar with Jacob Marley coming in the night to scare you around in Dickens' Christmas classic, maybe that was inspired by the chain dragging sound of the barn owl. We'll pick up next time with navigation and continue looking at birds.